Hello, everyone, and welcome to WooStream, where we are bringing the Willamette community together. I'm Eric Lasan, and for today's conversation, we are joined by Professor Karen Arabas. Karen's a professor of environmental science and the associate director of the Sustainability Institute at Willamette. She earned her PhD at Penn State University, and her research interests center on both theoretical questions regarding forest ecology and biogeography, as well as the application of theory to managing and restoring forests. Karen focuses on both natural and human disturbances to forests, and she uses tree rings to help interpret past disturbances and their impacts on forests, such as fire, climate, and competition. Karen and I first met when I got to Willamette University in 2014, and I was entering the campus as the director of community service learning. She was one of the first faculty members that I was able to work with. And so I really appreciate the way that you reached out and were willing to kind of help me come into the community and become part of the work here. So Karen, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you. And I understand that you just got back from a trip with students to Ireland, and so maybe you could talk about that course that you're teaching there and how the experience went.
Yeah, I was the faculty director for our study abroad program in Galway, Ireland, at the National University of Ireland in Galway. And I had 20 students with me. They take, when they're on this program, they take a number of courses in the Irish Studies department. So they do some Irish literature, some sociology, some Irish history, and then they take us other courses that they might be interested in at the university. And then I teach a course for them as well. And I was teaching a course on how to read the Irish landscape. And in addition to that, the Irish Studies department puts together this amazing set of field trips. So we had 5 field trips where we went all over Ireland, to Northern Ireland, in addition to that. And we saw a lot of incredible things, met amazing people, and we really, really learned a lot. And we were very sad to have to come home a little early.
I'm assuming that was because of the COVID-19 crisis.
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. We came back about 6 or 8 weeks early.
Okay, so that was a significant amount of time early, but it sounds like you were able to experience an awful lot during the time that you were there.
Yeah, we did. It was quite amazing. We every other weekend would get in a bus, all 20 of us, and with this amazing graduate student from Galway who was assigned to us, and we would get this tour and see things that sometimes most people don't see. Saw archaeological sites, toured cities, had a really fascinating tour in Belfast and also in Derry, where we learned a lot about the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Quite an amazing experience.
Right on. Yeah, I have a kind of a flip of the experience that you just had. At my last institution, I used to lead a service learning trip to Northern Ireland. And so we spent most of our time in Belfast and always went to Derry. The walled city there is just incredible. We usually do the northern coast and then, we usually get down to Ireland for a day or two, so we just get a teeny little experience of what you were doing the majority of your time there.
Yeah.
But what an outstanding country, and the people are so warm and friendly. I had a tremendous experience each time that we went.
It was really, I was very impressed with how everything was put together, because the students were learning things in the sociology, the history, and the literature classes, and then they would go see those things and
Yes.
talk to people in those environments who had experienced all the things that they were reading about. So a really terrific way to enable the students to take their classroom experience and have a real world experience to meld the two together. It's really terrific.
Right. I firmly believe that study abroad can be the best of experiential learning, especially when students are fortunate enough to have a faculty member along with them to really actually teach the content, as you say, in real time, when they can learn about a piece of history or read a text and then go out and like you said, experience it and see it for themselves. I don't think there's anything better than that.
Yeah.
So it's so exciting. I'm really really glad for you and your students that you're there. And so how has it been to come back to to come back to the U.S. in the midst of the crisis? You told me before we started recording today that you've just been in self-quarantine for the last couple weeks.
Yep, I got back and immediately did the 14-day self-quarantine. It was not required, but I felt that it was the right thing to do, given the fact that in addition to going around Ireland and being in close contact with 20-year-olds who were touring around a lot of Europe, plus the fact that I was in 3 airports and on 2 planes that had pretty much probably run the gauntlet and had been exposed. I have no symptoms. I have not been tested, made it through quarantine. And it was interesting. Basically lived in the basement, haven't done that for a lot of years. And my family was great. They provided really good support and kept me fed and entertained. And now I'm up being able to look out windows and get around a little bit more.
Up above ground.
Yes.
Have you been able to get outside?
Yeah. I have been taking walks and going on runs and things like that. Yeah.
Good. That's one of the only things that's keeping me sane, is being able to still go outside.
Yes.
Get some exercise and fresh air, and it's really made a big difference.
That has definitely been a saving grace, and the weather's been pretty decent, so it hasn't been too much trouble to get out.
Yeah. The weather's mostly cooperating, right? Well, speaking of being outside and the weather, you've had a lot to do with Willamette at Zena through the years. Maybe we shift our conversation and talk a little bit about that. Starting with your experience with Zena from the beginning of the genesis of the property and the acquisition, and the program there has certainly shifted over the years. So that might be a good thing to talk about.
Yeah. Well, Zena refers to, for people who might not be familiar with it, a 300-acre property that Willamette owns, and it's about 15 miles outside of, or from Willamette to the property. It's in West Salem in the Eola Hills, and we acquired it in 2008. It is 300 acres of oak forest and some Douglas fir plantation. We acquired it in a kind of a complicated set of steps, but it is a property that is covered by what's called a conservation easement, which means that its uses are restricted to those that will enhance the ecological value of the property. And so, for example, we can't clear cut it and plant grapes or build McMansions on it. We have to protect the ecological value of it in perpetuity as a result of the conservation easement. So since 2008, that's been our focus at the property, is assessing what is there ecologically and then coming up with a plan as to how we're going to continue to protect it. And I've been involved since 2008. We actually had some, we would take students out to the property when it was owned by its previous owners, to take a look at it and talk about the ecology of these oak forests and oak woodlands in the Willamette Valley and the prairies and how important they are. And now, of course, we have great access to those kinds of things for our students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot has happened there in even just the years since I've been at Willamette, since 2014. It seemed like for a while, there was kind of almost like a summer program going on there for some students. And then, while we were kind of in the final phases of the use agreement, working that out, then most activity was almost on hold there for a while. And now we're really kind of reopening and reinvigorating, the activity on the property in so many ways. What are some of the course-based or research-based things that you've been engaged in since maybe in the last year or two?
Yeah, so there are 2 kind of major research areas and areas of interest on the property, the ecological restoration and the sustainable forestry. And, I can talk about them separately, but they're really intertwined because both of those sets of activities support the ecological value of the property. I focus mostly on ecological restoration with several other colleagues, and Joe Bowersox in my department is also involved in the sustainable forestry. That's his area of expertise. So most of the work that I've been doing there has been involved in setting up permanent sampling plots in the oak woodland. And so we go back to those every couple of years. And the kinds of things we're interested in looking at in those plots are specifically the vegetation and what's happening to it. Some of those plots are what we would call control plots. We haven't done any restoration work, and others the trees have been thinned out, or we've removed invasive species. And then the sampling program allows us to go back and see the impacts of the activities or the lack of activities, so that we can understand best the kinds of restoration activities that will support the ecosystems that we're interested in supporting. Maybe some of my former students are out there watching, my field research assistants. I think I've worked with, I don't know, over the years, maybe 20 or 30 students during the summer who got to trudge through poison oak and bees and all kinds of lovely things to go in and collect data. We cored a lot of the trees to get their ages and to look at their growth patterns to better understand how long-term growth occurs in these oak woodlands, so that we can maybe understand how a changing climate might impact the ecosystem. So anyway, I've really tried to employ students as much as possible in the data collection and analysis process. So we have about 10 years of data from those plots now, and we use that data to design our land management plans. So the way that these properties work is that you come up with a land management plan that goes out about 10 years. And it's a little fuzzier the farther out you go in that 10-year period, because who knows what's going to happen. But we're constantly using data to adjust as we go along. It's called adaptive management. It's the way that we allow what we're seeing happening on the landscape to feed back into our plans for how we're going to manage.
Great. Actually making decisions based on the data that you're collecting and interpreting.
Yeah, it's a pretty good method.
That's outstanding. Well, and I think overall, I mean, you're describing this other opportunity that Willamette has. I mean, most colleges and universities have study abroad programs to some degree or another. Maybe not to the degree of structure and depth that Willamette offers, but I don't think too many colleges and universities have a place like Zena that's as close to campus, where students can go and have more of these experiential learning opportunities. What are some of the ways that you've seen students maybe transform from actually having those experiences, tromping around in the poison oak, but actually learning how to collect data, on campus in a classroom, but then actually going out into the field, and like you said, a place where now we've gathered 10 years worth of data, but what's the impact that has for students in their learning process?
I think it has a number of impacts. There are some students who know that this is exactly what they want to do with their lives, and so having that experience at Willamette confirms that a little bit more. It gives them some real hands-on experience. And then there are the students who aren't really sure about going out into the woods and collecting data, and watching them realize that is something that they love and it's actually something they can do is tremendous. It is one of the great joys of what I do, is seeing students go through that process. And then there's some that, it's not necessarily going to be their thing, but that the way that I design a lot of the projects that I do in my class as well as my research is that the students can sort of see it from design all the way through to, and this is what the data shows. And so I think for many students, getting to do a whole research project is great no matter what they do in their lives, because it takes them through that entire process and shows how nothing's perfect. And particularly when you are working in the great outdoors, that natural lab where you don't have the controls that you might have in a chemistry lab. And so you have to troubleshoot and revise what you're doing and maybe go back and do it again, constantly thinking about, well, how would I do this better the next time so that the next group that goes out can do a better job. So I think there are a lot of life lessons and future lessons for whatever your employment might be that come out of those experiences.
Right
I know
on.
it happens to me every time I learn something new, and it informs what I do next.
Yeah, that's what I've always loved about being able to have experiential learning opportunities with students is I usually come away with some, new insight or learned how to solve a new problem or, the experience ends up being just as valuable for me. And so that from a lifelong learning approach, it's been an incredible pleasure to work with students in those kinds of opportunities. Well, excellent. Are there any of the students that you have worked with over the years that you can think of off the top of your head that have gone off to do, maybe they've gone to grad school or they've still been in the field, or somebody that you've been in touch with recently?
Well, I have a number of students who have gone into some kind of land management careers. Do you want me to name names?
You can if you want. I think that's okay.
Yeah, okay. Well, Katie Rigsby comes to mind, working for the U.S. Forest Service, and she spent a lot of time doing kind of pretty hardcore field work in a lot of the forest research that the Forest Service has going on, and she's proven herself to be very good at that, and so naturally has been kicked upstairs to management. She's very busy trying to manage these programs, these huge data collection programs.
Wow.
Have other students with interests specifically in restoration who may have gone on to graduate school. A lot of students go on in geography and biogeography who have those interests. I do dendrochronology, so I analyze tree rings to look at forest disturbances, and I've had a number of students who have pursued those interests, and a couple of whom are professors right now at other institutions around the country.
That's neat. I would imagine that's probably pretty satisfying, or just a cool feeling to teach, have a student that then goes on to become a professor and teach other students.
I mean, it's always nice to create the little mini-me's or have a hand in that. I'm also really amazed by students who will take all of whatever they learn at Willamette and go on and do completely different things. A lot of students working in the public sector, nonprofit world, who take a lot of, turn whatever we did into just things I never would have thought of doing, and have had opportunities and been able to influence in a variety of different ways.
Right on. Yeah, I mean, data collection and data management is a skill that can come across so many platforms, and it sounds like even in some ways some of the data that you've collected could be used as the basis to inform policies, and so probably some of the lessons they learned through that experience would help them, whether it's like you said in the ecological framework or the sustainability framework, or like you said, working for nonprofits. There's just so many transferable skills that come out of these types of experiences.
Yeah, and I always say that when people ask me, isn't it kind of depressing to be an environmental scientist? And I say no, because I get to work with these amazing young people who go out and make a difference, and they're on Capitol Hill, and they are doing social work, and they might be working directly for the environment or for other people. And that's how I get out of bed every morning, is knowing that I get to work with those people.
Yeah, I agree. Same here. That's it certainly helps motivate.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you just mentioned earlier, and then it's in your bio that I read, is that tree ring research. I mean, I always just thought of tree rings as that's how you tell how old a tree is, and it sounds like
Yeah.
there's so much more to be learned from that. And like you said, I also thought that you had to chop the tree down to be able to count the rings. And so, the coring is a technique that obviously wouldn't kill the tree. So maybe
Yeah.
talk about that, because it sounds like there's so much more information that can be derived from that process.
Well, actually, since you brought it up, let me get a little visual that I
All
have.
right, show and tell.
Let's see, use this one. Yeah. So, in the best of all possible worlds, to have the entire cross section of a tree will enhance your research, but we don't want to, if you have a clear cut, that works out. But I have a piece of equipment that allows you to take a core from the tree. Is that showing up okay?
You can hold it up a little closer to the camera. Okay. Wow.
Okay, so that's a little cross section of the tree that I can take using an increment borer, and you can see the tree rings on it.
Yeah.
You could count backwards from the bark and figure out which calendar year, each of those rings pertains to or represents. Okay. But you also notice that they are different widths.
Mm-hmm.
And that tells you something about the growth conditions during that year. So where you have a wider ring, the tree was happy, right?
Okay.
So it was getting enough water, enough light. It wasn't having too much competition. There wasn't disease. But then there are also years, I'm going to put this down now because it was
sure.
awkward, where the rings are very narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And those years represent years of less growth and are oftentimes correlated with adverse climate conditions or lack of nutrients or competition from other trees or disease or things like that. And so what we'll do with these is we actually measure those widths using an instrument in the lab, and then we can run a variety of different statistical programs to tell us something about those growth. And you have to take out kind of natural growth trends, right? The rings are going to get smaller as the tree grows larger, just because there's an age-related growth trend. But you can strip that out statistically and see what's left, right? So you see what is actually a signal in the tree rings versus all the noise.
Okay.
So we've looked at a variety of different things. We've looked at the growth trends as related to lack of thinning in the forests, right? So the forests get kind of crowded and the trees grow more slowly. So we're interested in seeing kind of what optimal thinning might look like to encourage tree growth. We've also looked at climate. So we've taken these tree rings and correlated them with our past climate records to see how, in particular, Oregon white oak does in a hotter, drier climate, because it's actually adapted to those kinds of climate conditions.
Okay.
Right? If maybe this climate future we're looking at will be a good thing for this particular species.
Interesting. And so can you even tell if, you mentioned disease, but can you even tell if the tree was dealing with pests or a specific type of pest during some of those times?
Yes. Not so much on this particular species, but on other species. There is for example, in ponderosa pine, which is mostly found on the eastern side of the state, there is a moth that eats the caterpillar part of the moth life cycle, eats the pine needles, and that causes a suppression in growth. But it's on this cycle so that you can see the growth suppression over time. And so they've used tree rings to actually look for Pandora moth outbreaks in the past.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And there's some work seeing if cicadas have the same impact on some of the species in the east where you have the big cicada outbreaks. So, yeah.
Cool. And I would imagine, seems like one of the easiest or more basic things to do would be to, once you get the rings matched up with a given year, is to go back and look at weather patterns or look at what the weather was like that year. Do you ever have the students look at the ring and try to predict what the weather was like, and then verify that with the historical weather data?
Yeah. So because we have good historical data going back roughly about 100 years. So is that right? Yes, that's right. And so they'll be looking at it and they'll be seeing as they're actually assigning calendar dates to the tree. So we look at these under the microscope and assign calendar dates to them before we do the measurements. And they'll say, wow, 1983 is always narrow. And so we'll go back to the data and we'll see locally, yeah, that was a really, really, really dry year. And that's always kind of exciting.
Yeah, that's really neat to be able to kind of put together different sets of data and see how they correlate and correspond. Awesome. I guess my last question for today would just be, since you have a sustainability lens that you look through your work, is there anything about Willamette and sustainability that you would want to kind of, as a kind of a closing thought, or just to your observations of our campus and how we relate to and try to do sustainability as a community?
Yeah, sure. I have, let's see, I don't want to go back through the whole history of sustainability at Willamette. You can read about that on the webpage.
There you go.
I have been impressed, I think, from the start of the kind of just intrinsic value that we place on sustainability at Willamette. And as sustainability became sort of a more popular thing on college campuses and something that people used as a marketing tool, I'm always reminded that Willamette has just always done that. It's kind of in our nature. It's in the nature of the people who decide to come to Willamette. And so we haven't had to work too hard to get people to recycle or whatever our day-to-day sustainability activities are. And that has always been really, really important to me, that we've walked the walk and talked the talk all at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. From the acquisition of Zena to our organic land management practices right on campus and in our landscaping and gardening. You highlighted recycling. The types of courses that so many faculty choose to teach, I think, is another great indicator of the value of sustainability at Willamette. But I appreciate your insight on that. Well, I think we're pretty much winding down, unless you have anything else that you wanted to share with the audience today.
No, I guess I would just like everybody to know that thinking about you and hoping that you are finding ways to stay active and both mentally and physically in this crazy, crazy time, and that it will be over someday.
Thank you for those words of wisdom, because I think I needed to hear that right now. Well, thanks very much, Karen, for spending this time with us today. And thanks also to our viewers. If you enjoyed this conversation, please come back to WooStream often, as we'll be adding new content weekly. Please also share your feedback with us and send suggestions for additional content to alumni@willamette.edu. And I want to thank Karen one more time for joining us. It was a pleasure being able to talk with you, and I always love hearing about your work, and it was really fun. This was the first chance I got to hear about your experience in Ireland. So welcome back from that trip, and welcome back to your students, and I'm glad that you all made it back safe and had such a great experience.
Thank you, Eric. Happy to participate.
Right on. All right, take care.